My experience at MBA was amazing. It was a completely new drug slash medicine. And I had been a bit scared of using ibogaine because it's called the Mount Everest of drugs or of psychedelic experiences. And whenever I take a psychedelic, I'm a bit scared because you never know what's going to happen. It's basically like taking a trip. Maybe we're even scared of going on a vacation once in a while because, we're going somewhere maybe where we haven't been. It's always a challenge, and ibogaine probably is the biggest challenge. It also comes with the risk of dying because ibogaine can be dangerous if you have a heart problem. And I mean, I never had a heart problem, and I did examinations before, but still, it's a bit scary. But at Ambio, they kind of took that fear away through their professional behavior. The whole crew was extremely friendly, competent, funny, and pleasant to be with. I was not afraid at all that it might be dangerous to my heart. So I could really focus on the psychedelic or the healing aspect of the journey, which is still kind of frightening because you never know, what you're going to be confronted with. But it was great. I learned a lot about myself. In contrast to other psychedelic experiences, ibogaine lasts for the longest time, or like even after like 6 weeks after you've taken it, you still feel the positive effects. And I mean, I still feel them now, but you still feel them like very physically. You feel amazing. You feel like you've done something really healing to your body and mind. So it was good.
And you've done quite a few other psychedelics prior to that, correct?
Well, I've done the so-called classical psychedelics, LSD and psilocybin slash magic mushrooms, which I think are great. I've done them probably more than the average person, but also other more rare psychedelics like ayahuasca, which is also becoming quite mainstream. But I mean, for me, it was still a challenge to do ayahuasca. I did it about 5 times. I've done ketamine, but I'm not so sure. Well, that's not a classical psychedelic, but I guess it's also counts as a psychedelic. There's not so many psychedelics around actually, but I'm interested in them, so I probably tried most of them.
Yeah, that's really cool. I would agree. I felt, completely safe at Ambio. The experience was just beautiful, and I feel like it's just a neat insight to healing that meditation and yoga and other modalities just can't quite get you there.
No, it's impossible to be on ibogaine without taking ibogaine.
Right.
It does certain things in your brain that only ibogaine does. And
Right.
if you believe that that's healthy, then I guess you're in the right place taking it. And I took it with 4 vets, Special Forces, U.S. Army vets who had suffered from severe brain injuries. And basically, they all got healed, after taking ibogaine once. That night healed all 4 of them from like severe migraines, and so it's really working. It's you don't imagine that it's working. Actually is working. It actually is doing your brain a lot of good. At least that's what I experienced, and that's what studies show that I have looked at.
Yeah, the research is,
Ibogaine is great, actually. It should be legal.
I agree. Yeah. For me, the right setting, that ceremonial, all that integration before and after, um, yeah, to some extent, I feel like everyone should experience psychedelics if they're called to do so, you know?
Well, if your community is interested in it, I wrote about it in my Substack. My Substack is called Stone Sapiens Substack. So in the archives, you will find, I think, a 7-part kind of like a mini series, my writing on my ibogaine experience, which goes more into detail what happened. So if anyone is interested in that ibogaine experience, you can read it on the Stone Sapiens Substack.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I'll have to check that out myself. Now,
Yeah.
how did you go down this rabbit hole? Because I've looked at all the works that you've wrote before you dived into Blitzed and Tripped. How did you start down that journey?
And that was more of a personal thing. My girlfriend gave me LSD when I was 23 in downtown Manhattan, and I didn't really know what it was because I'd never been educated about it in school or anything. But I was just curious, and since she was my girlfriend, I trusted her. So we took LSD together, and it was very interesting. trip. It was also a frightening trip because I didn't know what was happening. I thought maybe I go insane now because I see things differently than I saw them before. Also, I didn't know if it would stop again. It was quite strong. So it lasted for about 10 hours. I thought maybe some switch in my brain had been flipped, and now I was like insane basically because I could see sounds and hear colors and stuff like that, which was quite beautiful because I'm a writer, so I'm interested obviously in having crazy experiences or learning more about the world and seeing different perspectives. That's part of my writing, at least, being open to new realities and new impressions. So for me as a writer, it was interesting. And fortunately, I did not go insane. It stopped after 10 hours. And I was my old self again. But in a way, I was never my old self again, really, because I was now enriched with that experience, that there are different ways to see the same thing. And that was quite helpful to me. It expanded my mind, so to speak. So my young mind was quite impressed with psychedelics, and that's why I took it more. I mean, these psychedelics like LSD or mushrooms, they're not addictive. Like you don't really, I mean, not at all feel any physical dependency on them. But it's like not like coffee or alcohol or cigarettes that actually do make you physically dependent. That's not the case, but still they kept me interested. So once in a while I would take psychedelics. There was like a Nobel Prize winner in physics, I think, who says I take psychedelics once a year to just get a different view on my work and stuff like that. So I used it like kind of like that. And then my mother, unfortunately, developed Alzheimer's disease. And probably by coincidence, I don't really recall how it came about, or maybe I was Googling it. I found a scientific paper on positive effects of microdosed LSD on Alzheimer's patients. So I discussed this with my father, who takes care of my mother, and he was a judge in his professional career in Germany. And he basically said, if this is really helpful, why isn't it then a medicine? Why is it illegal? It doesn't make sense to me. Like he sentenced people to prison sentences for drugs, and now I kind of try to nudge him into giving his wife an illegal drug. So he said, what's the true story? Why is LSD illegal? That kind of led me on my journey to write this book, Tripped, which first was called LSD for Mom, because that's really what the book's about. Because I find out that LSD is not illegal because it's dangerous. Obviously, there are dangers to the drug, just like there are dangers to tobacco or alcohol or cannabis or like any drug. Obviously, there's also dangers to LSD. I'm not saying everyone should take LSD in high dosages at all times, and you have to kind of know what you're doing. It's a powerful substance, but that's not the reason why it's illegal. The reason why it's illegal is there are different reasons. Historical reasons, ideological reasons. The war on drugs is not so much a scientific enterprise, but a way to control the population, to control certain aspects of the population. In the 60s, it was designed to control the peace movement, which was very powerful in the US against the Vietnam War. So these are reasons. And I also found a connection. In the early 50s, the CIA would do a lot of mind control experiments with LSD, and I was researching that. So my book really tells the true story of this medicine LSD and why it was so far not allowed to actually be what it is, which is a medicine, more medicine than like a drug. It's not a hedonistic drug, a compound that you can use to heal, basically. So that's the book Trip. So my kind of personal interest kind of turned into a professional enterprise with this book. And I had written a book before on drugs, which is called Blitz, examining the role of drugs in Nazi Germany. So I'm kind of interested in drugs and history, not only, but these were two books that also were successful in the United States, and they kind of come from my personal interest in psychedelics. So I could turn my passion into my profession, or at least benefit from my passion in my profession. But I'm not only write about drugs. I also write about different things, about love. I'm not obsessed with drugs, but I find them quite interesting.
They are interesting for sure. Yeah, I did see that you had written on love. But yeah, the history with psychedelics just really sparked my curiosity. How did your mom do on LSD with microdosing?
She did pretty good. She's not taking it anymore because now she's in a home, and my father doesn't want to interfere with medications giving in the old people's home. That the LSD did not stop her Alzheimer's, but my father had the definite impression that it slowed it down for quite a while. And I spoke now with a researcher who had done this early scientific study, and he said it is especially working if you take it as early as possible. So while Alzheimer's is coming on or is developing, if you do it then, you have the best chances of actually even, maybe preventing it from really taking over. But my mother started a bit too late, but it still had the effect that whenever she did take it, and she took it over several years, she was more in the room than without it. So she took it about 2, 3 times a week, just a drop of microdose LSD in her morning coffee. So on these days, she was more alert, more energetic, happier, a better communicator than without LSD. On LSD days, she was able to read the newspaper, which she couldn't on days without LSD. So very obviously, something was always happening in her brain that was good for her brain. I like the LSD was like kind of wrestling with the Alzheimer's. And I think if it was properly examined by pharmaceutical companies, then for sure we would have an LSD type medication in the shelves of our pharmacies. And probably this will happen in the future, but bringing new medicines, especially psychedelic medicines, onto the market is very difficult for pharmaceutical companies. The regulations are quite stiff. These substances are illegal still in the United States and in most countries. So it's quite difficult to set up the necessary 3-phase test regimen. So yeah, we have a long way to go, and also the current U.S. administration kind of said in the beginning, like the health minister RFK, who said he's going to legalize psychedelics and turn it around and really care for science and the need of the people, does not deliver at all, and nothing's happening really so far. I don't see anything. I just see things happening in other areas which we might not need to talk about. I mean, so far governments worldwide are neglecting their duty to look at these substances from a scientific point of view, because dementia is the plague of the future. The numbers are rising dramatically. The human costs are enormous. The suffering is incredible for not only the patient, but more even for the families. So not doing anything about that, in my mind, is actually a crime. RFK should step back for like announcing that he would, actually do something. And he's just following the good old war against drug kind of regimes of, the past administrations. And Democrats, just like Republicans, have completely failed when it comes to drugs and have left their citizens alone in the rain. It's really a shame.
It is, yeah. I mean, obviously the rates with dementia and Alzheimer's and just neurodegenerative diseases, Parkinson's, is just going up and up.
Same, yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
heartbreaking.
ibogaine can also help, especially against Parkinson's, apparently. And there is movement in the US, like the state of Texas is now slowly warming up to ibogaine, because vets really benefit from ibogaine, as I saw with my own eyes. And vets play some sort of political role in the United States, because the United States is such a war-loving country that attacks so many other countries. So you have like millions of vets, and they come back traumatized, obviously. I mean, they're not only killing other people, other innocent people all over the world, they're also, damaging themselves. So let's hope that at least through that vets program, those programs that you have in the US, maybe the psychedelics can kind of make a comeback, because there were times when they were completely legal. For tens of thousands of years, people were using psychedelics all over the planet, until like the US government suddenly said, no, now we're going to, and the German government, the Nazi government also, now we're going to wage a war against drugs. It's basically a war against people.
Yeah, that is true. I started doing some research, and it seems like every culture, every ancient culture has had some type of psychedelic.
Yeah, it's very normal for people to use psychedelics, because they're so beneficial for the brain. And what makes us sapiens is our big brain. And our big brain wouldn't be so big without psychedelics. It doesn't come from like drinking water. We are able to integrate very complex molecules into our organism and benefit from that. It's just the governments are a bit afraid of that because then we become too smart. If people are very smart, they're less likely to become dumb consumers, and that's not good for capitalism. So actually, capitalism is a bit of a problem. I know Americans believe in capitalism because socialism was such a big failure. But capitalism also seems to be quite a big failure, actually. It's destroying the planet. It's making us dumb. It's creating social inequalities all over the world. We need to work on our economic system, I would say.
Yeah, we are not going in a good direction right now.
Not really.
So with I had come across and you might have seen this, it was an article from 2017. It was published in Neurology about a lot of the neuropsychiatric issues that Hitler had had. And it was interesting because the researchers, and I know you've done this, looked at Morell's diary. They had looked at, all the stimulants like the atropine, the caffeine, testosterone, the meth, and then to bring him down, the barbiturates and morphine. How, for those of my listeners that aren't familiar with this, how did Hitler get into and how did the Nazis get into psychedelics? Were they looking to access the spiritual world? Were they using it just for a physical advantage?
Well, you just said, how did they get into psychedelics? I would not say they got into psychedelics. I would say they got into drugs because they got into a lot of opioids and methamphetamine. These substances are not psychedelics. Psychedelics were just like a fringe interest of the SS in Dachau when they did mescaline and LSD experiments with prisoners to develop mind control. But this was really fringe, like the massive drug abuse that was happening in the so-called Third Reich was with methamphetamine. The German army was the first army that was using methamphetamine. And that's just a pure stimulant. It's basically speed or crystal meth. That was a German invention. It was patented in Germany in 1938, methamphetamine. And it was completely legal and accepted in society. Like you didn't have to go to some weird person to buy crystal meth or something. You could just go to your well-respected pharmacy and buy a package of Berlin manufactured methamphetamine. So methamphetamine was a huge hit in the late 30s. And also other drugs that we know today, like heroin or cocaine, were German products. Cocaine was made by the Merck company in Darmstadt, Germany. Heroin was made by the Bayer company. Germany didn't have colonies like England or France in the 19th century, but it had the largest population in Europe, a big working population, and these people needed, well, not needed, but they crave, well, maybe they did need it. They used a lot of drugs. Again, capitalist, performance-driven society. We all want to, be the best. And Germany, England, they would just import like plants, basically. Also, even tea. Tea is a plant. They had tea, they had coffee, they had spices. They brought all these like nice things from their colonies. But Germany didn't have that, and it wasn't so easy. You could buy it from England, but I mean, you would have to pay in hard currency. So Germany actually saw a boom of its pharmaceutical industry in the late 19th century, developing all kinds of synthetic drugs, in contrast to the natural drugs that the colonizing powers had. Germany's pharmaceutical industry was very strong and developed a lot of drugs. As I mentioned, heroin, for example. The same guy who developed aspirin in the 1880s developed heroin 10 days later for the Bayer company. So it was really I call it in my book Blitz, the pharmaceutical valley, not the Silicon Valley, but the pharmaceutical valley at the Rhine River. So Germany had a lot of drugs, homemade, made in Germany drugs. And also when the Nazis took power, they were the first anti-drug government. So they said morphine, which was also a German product, should not be used anymore. Cocaine should not be used anymore. But still, they would use some German products like methamphetamine because it wasn't stigmatized. And one guy who was working for the German army, the Wehrmacht professor, is responsible for performance enhancement of the German soldiers. He came up with a theory that an army doped with methamphetamine would be superior to an army that doesn't use methamphetamine. because they could stay up longer and fight longer and they would be more aggressive. So before Germany attacked France, the German army had 35 million dosages of methamphetamine delivered from the Berlin-based Temmler company, which manufactured the methamphetamine. And that enabled the German troops to basically overrun the British and French enemies. And that was the first time that an army was using synthetic drug on a huge scale. So that is one of the important stories of World War II that I tell in Blitz, and that it hadn't been told before, because before historians would just describe like how the battles would be fought, or but would not go into these like to this like pharmaceutical angle, which is obviously very important, you know.
Yeah. I
We are
had a
nothing
theory.
without pharmaceuticals. We take drugs every day.
Right. So really, Germany led that pharmaceutical revolution, so to speak, with drugs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you could say that.
And they didn't really have, today we have coffee and sugar, and we used to have ephedra and things like that. I mean, they weren't doing coffee back then and sugar, right? For the most part.
No, it was not like today where you can go into a coffee shop at every corner and drink coffee. Coffee was quite expensive, so the German army they compared the prices. What does it cost to keep a soldier awake for a whole night with coffee versus with methamphetamine? And it cost like, I think it was 51 cents with coffee and like 17 cents with methamphetamine. So it's just a calculation. And also with coffee, you cannot really stay awake for the
Right.
whole night, I would say. I mean, maybe for 3, 4 hours if you drink like a lot, but then your heart rate is too strong. I don't know. So methamphetamine is a good solution if you're an army physiologist looking for ways to keep your guys awake. And still, also special forces. I just discussed this with the U.S. Army vets at the Ibogaine clinic. They told me that when they were on duty not in Vietnam, in Afghanistan and in Iraq, that they were also supplied with such stimulants. It does work, for a
Sure.
soldier.
Sure. Then you run the risk of, especially with methamphetamines versus amphetamines, that more addictive tendency, right?
It's quite addictive. In contrast to psychedelics, these stimulants are quite addictive because once the effect wears off, you kind of become depressed and depleted of energy. You have more energy while it lasts, but then, you have to kind of like you have to rest for like a week. But obviously you cannot rest if you're a soldier or if you're a worker. You take it every day, keep up, and you can do this for a while, but there will be the crash. The crash will be coming, which is not such a big problem for an army. Let's say you fight an enemy for 3 months and you just take meth for 3 months. That's quite possible. I mean, it's not healthy, obviously, because it does create an unnatural situation in your brain, but it is possible. And then you just let the boys, or the, not boys only, boys and girls, women and men rest. So unfortunately, stimulants are quite efficient for doing ugly things like going to war.
Sure. Now, what's the connection with oxycodone in the Nazis or with Hitler?
Well, Oxycodone was Hitler's favorite drug, funny as that may sound. I mean, it's not funny, it's just curious, I would say, that this drug that created such big problems in the United States was actually Hitler's favorite drug. It was a German product at the time. It was called Oxycodone. It was made by the Merck company. They developed it. It's an opioid. Opioids were a German invention in general. The morphine was a German invention. And then from morphine, companies like Bayer or Merck created opioids, like heroin is an opioid, like a designer drug, you could say. And Oxycodone was kind of a cousin to heroin. A very successful product in Germany. Apparently, the high was extremely pleasant. And at the time, people were using it intravenously. So it's much stronger than taking like I never know what's the difference between Oxycontin and Oxycodone. I guess Oxycontin has a time release thing built in. But I mean, these are just pills. They're dangerous and people die from them. You can overdose also from pills. But I think the opioid crisis is also fueled by people crushing the pills and then sniffing the pills, because then the effect is stronger. So the Nazis or the Germans, did it in the strongest way possible by injecting it into the vein. And Hitler used this for the first time in 1943. So he wasn't an opioid user from the beginning. He was actually quite healthy until about 1941. The first recorded consumption of an opioid was in 1941 when he had a severe flu during the war against the Soviet Union, and he wanted to go to the military briefing, and the doctor said, well, I have this opioid, I can give that to you and you for sure will be able to go. He was a bit reluctant, but Hitler was just interested in being able to function. So opioids actually made him function, as weird as that might sound, because the opioid, especially the Oxycodone, given intravenously, creates kind of a confident high. So you're not like, like you're very clear, your mental capacities, at least you think that they're quite clear and high. You can articulate very well. So Hitler was using that as a performance enhancing drug, but then obviously became addicted to it because opioids are very addictive. So yeah, then when Germany lost the war, part of the booty that America was taking from winning were patents from German pharmaceutical companies. So the Merck company, they lost their patent on Oxycodone, and it became free again. So that's why, what's the American company called that then made Oxycontin? Purdue,
Oh,
was able to make it.
I wondered how that happened after the war.
Yeah, I didn't research exactly precisely the history of the opioids in the United States post-war, but I'm pretty sure that people have written extensively about that. There've also been TV series about it. But it does come from Germany. All the evil things come from the Nazi regime, basically. They were really masters at developing evil stuff.
Right. I'd also read that, and it seems to me almost that Hitler's physician was kind of ahead of his time. He was doing probiotics, and did I see something about like fecal transplants?
What kind of transplants?
Fecal?
Well, he was an avant-garde kind of guy, and Hitler actually appreciated that. Sometimes he's described as a quack, but he wasn't really a quack. He just took a lot of risks. What he was not very knowledgeable about was side effects of drugs. And he gave Hitler so many substances at the same time. That was also reckless because drugs interact with each other, and so a doctor today would hopefully be much more careful with giving so many substances at the same time. He wasn't. So he was experimenting, but also Hitler was experimenting. Hitler was the patient that also told, he was the leader. He was the Führer, so he was the dictator. Like he basically also said to Morel, I want this, I want that, give me that. So Morel was also afraid of him and just kind of gave him whatever Hitler wanted.
From your research, do you think that might have made, I don't want to say Hitler more commanding, but more persuasive or more powerful? Or do you think that maybe just led to his downfall at the end?
I mean, ultimately, it contributed to his downfall because his health began to deteriorate due to the many substances that he took. Some of them were made under not very hygienic conditions by Morel himself. Morel had his own private lab where he would invent new medicines for the Führer. And Hitler loved that, he loved to try out new things. He was reckless, I guess, with his health, even though he was so obsessed with it. They had a very interesting relationship. They were both quite experimental in that regard. So in a way, Morel saved the world by destroying Hitler's health. But also Hitler is a self-destructive character. National Socialism is a self-destructive movement. It basically hates itself, so it hates everyone. You hate yourself, you hate the other. It's not a movement of love and it's not a nourishing movement, just like the right-wing movement all over the world. The right wing is never nourishing because it's like attacking the other. So it's not creating a healthy environment for everybody. It just, it's a terminated thing. So Hitler was, self-destructing in a way, but Morel helped him with that self-destruction. But Hitler did, while the big self-destructing cycle is already in motion, while you can also have, amazing progress and upbeat times. Hitler would take the Oxycodone, he would be extremely confident, he would be, in the room. Just like Trump is sometimes like overconfident, like he knows everything.
Sure.
But it's a the hubris, it's not being in touch with reality. It's not being in touch really with also unpleasant facts, and maybe acknowledging that you made mistakes, and maybe being a bit more cautious. Those are all aspects that make a truly great leader. So Hitler was going into a room with like 50 officers who would tell him that, maybe this is not so great how he's leading the war. But he was, just so confident on his oikodal that he wouldn't really listen. He was just too full of himself, and that eventually leads to the downfall.
Right.
Out of touch with reality.
Right.
It's the same with like Trump. Trump is a great president for everyone who's for him. But the people who are not for him, like he totally neglects these people. He's not the president of the Americans. He's the president of MAGA America. And that's just not that's not good leadership. Hitler was also he was the Führer for everyone who liked him. But if you didn't like him, he would like put you in a camp or something. That's not good leadership.
No.
That's leadership coming out of fear and out of
Yeah, how different would it be if we
sorry
all
to be so critical about your current president. I should respect it, but you also invited me to be analytical about the current situation.
Yeah. Well, it would be such different times if we could do a psychedelic journey at some point in our coming of age and experience life with love and enlightenment, so to speak, right?
Well, I mean that was my big hope with RFK actually, that he would be able to turn the United States into the psychedelic states of America, and I think it would do the country a lot of good if there was a lot of people going on the journey and examining themselves and how they behave in relationship with their families, with the environment, with their work colleagues. I mean, America is an incredibly aggressive and violent place, and that's really sad, because it's such an affluent, it could be such a great country. It's kind of eating itself up, and it needs a lot of healing. People are afraid of each other. That's quite sad. So those would be the big challenges of a current leadership in the country, and that is not happening. It's not a very psychedelic approach that is being underway currently, and I was thinking it would be a bit more like that,
Yeah,
but I was naive.
I think we were all hopeful about that. At least, I mean, some of the changes with food is improving slightly from a nutritional perspective.
That's possible. That would be certainly necessary because you're also the country of obesity, unfortunately. Many people are suffering. I mean, the food, you have so much wealth in food, and but the food industry is organized in such a way that such a huge amount of bad food ends up in people's mouths and digestive systems. I was an American high school student in Flint, Michigan in 1988, and I was absolutely shocked at the quality of the food for the lunch, It was so bad. People are actually eating this stuff, and this cannot be good for society. So I hope it's right what you're saying, that they're slowly, like the food pyramid and all this like garbage is slowly changing, and people are starting to eat more healthily. It's difficult, How do you know but that's one of the main, that's the main thing in life, basically, is eating. You can really improve your life if you eat right.
100%, getting the right nutrients versus the chemicals.
Yeah, chemicals are bad.
Did you notice any changes in your health when you came over to Michigan?
My host mom, which I love very much, the first thing she said is, I don't do spices, which is kind of a nice, funny sentence. Could go into like a novel about the 80s. Could be like the first sentence of a novel about the 80s. I don't do spices. It was just salt, basically. That's the spice she would allow, but everything else was like too complicated or too, alien or whatever. So basically, it was, TV dinners and, put stuff in the microwave and heat it up. And that's very primitive, obviously. It's not a culture, and, it's nice to eat a hamburger once in a while. It tastes good. But I mean, the food has improved a lot. This was really the 80s, and also the food in Germany in the 80s was not as good as it is now, obviously. Did I experience health problems? I don't think so, because I was like 17. I was very strong. My daughter now is 17. She just told me, we just came home from lunch now, and she said, I must have really good genes. I only eat crap, but I'm still healthy. And she doesn't eat crap, but like, not compared to what I ate in Flint, Michigan. But I think as a teenager, you can really you can still take a lot. Let's put it that way. But I also liked it, I like to eat stupid macaroni and cheese 3 times a week. If you're a teenager, I wouldn't do it now, it was kind of teenager food in Flint, Michigan for everybody all the time. but we're
Yeah.
not teenagers our whole life. And if you are 50, 60 and you still eat macaroni and cheese 3 times a week from like a frozen kind of package, you probably will have negative health effects.
Yeah, I feel like the body's really good about forgiving up until about 25, 35.
Yeah, it
But yeah,
changes. Yeah, it changes in your 30s.
it does.
Also what drugs are concerned, you can take a lot of negative stuff and you will still make it, but there's a point in your life where you should become very conscious about what you put into your system.
Right. So far, what has been your favorite psychedelic or psychoactive that you've taken?
Well, we come back to the beginning of our conversation at the Ambio Ibogaine clinic. That was for me the most interesting psychedelic experience because it was just so unique to be in Mexico, of all places, taking a West African root bark. And it's so absurd. But as soon as that drug worked in my system, about 2 hours after I took those capsules, I felt like this is exactly what my body likes. It kind of flushed my brain, kind of switched my brain to repair mode, and then started like as crazy, like working on my brain, connecting neurons that had been disconnected. Like that's how I felt. I think that's what actually happens and put me into this 12-hour kind of waking dream. I thought that was quite unique. So I would rank this as my favorite, but I also like my first LSD trip, the horror trip, which I mentioned, because it was so strong and it showed me that there's a different world. It was kind of a David Lynch movie, experiencing the best David Lynch movie ever, like having it as your life for like 10 hours, which is frightening, but it's also, pretty cool. I've had a lot of good experiences with psychedelics. I can only recommend them. I mean, they're illegal and they're dangerous. Obviously, you should know what you're doing. You shouldn't take it if you have like a weak psyche or if you're afraid, or then you should only maybe take it with therapists. But for me, so far, they have been very beneficial, and I kind of liked all of them in a way.
Yeah, I would agree. You're never quite the same as you are before you take them in a good way, in all the best ways possible. And there's something very familiar with Ibogaine, at least it was to me. It felt very comforting and yeah, very nourishing. It was really neat.
Yeah, it's not very alien, even though it comes from African root bark. And I like when I take DMT, I've taken ayahuasca a few times. I don't really like that. Maybe it's also like a personal choice, or how you are made, or where your ancestors come from. I don't know. When I take ayahuasca, I feel like alien. This is weird. What's happening to me? I don't want this. But with ibogaine, I was like, yes, I want this more. Work on me. I trust this medicine completely. I don't know why. It's personal preference also. Some people like to drink red wine. Others like to eat ice cream. I
Right.
like ibogaine.
Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time, and I can't wait to hear about Stone Sapiens as that approaches.
Right. That's going to be my next book, and I'm happy to come back on your podcast and talk about that. And in the meantime, I want to remind everyone again to check out the Stone Sapiens Substack, because on that Substack, you can also kind of follow me on the journey of this new book, which is a world history, kind of looking at how drugs have been with us from day one and how they have influenced the human species as a species, but also our cultural evolution in different, eras and different places of this beautiful earth.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
So thank you for having me.